Hi, my name is Kellyanne Stackhouse, and this is my honors project presentation. It is called Preventative Education, and it is a 5-day unit about human trafficking for middle school students. So before we get too far into my project, I want to tell you a little bit about me. So I am a senior middle childhood education major with concentrations in mathematics and language arts. So when I graduate and get my teaching license, I will be able to teach math and language arts to 4th grade through 9th graders. I've also led the anti-human trafficking cosmic group on campus for the last 3 years. The group is called Trafficked Jam. I did not come up with the name. I am not that clever. Sorry. But through this group, I've really been able to do a lot of different really cool things. I've been able to work with an organization in Columbus called Out of Darkness. You'll hear a little bit more about them later. But I've also been able to work here in the community and really just get to learn more about human trafficking, what it looks like, but also ways to educate others about it. So with that background, why I chose this project makes a little bit more sense. So I'm really passionate about fighting human trafficking, but I'm also really passionate about middle schoolers and middle school content, because middle school is the time when a lot of students don't really care about school anymore. School is boring. I'd rather go watch TikToks or play video games. And so middle school teachers really have to work to make school interesting and engaging. Well, one of the ways to do that is to connect in-class content to bigger things in the world. And that's what I'm hoping to do here. I'm connecting language arts content to human trafficking, to this big problem that's happening in the world that impacts lots of people, in hopes that not only will students learn about human trafficking, but also that it will make their content more engaging. So, the process of creating this unit. This unit was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. I initially thought, oh, I can make a unit plan about human trafficking. That'd be easy peasy lemon squeezy. It was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. So, the first thing I had to do was break down the different things I wanted to cover. First, I need to decide what kinds of trafficking I wanted to cover, because there are lots of different kinds of trafficking. Initially, I was going to do labor and organ trafficking, just because those would be easier to talk about in a classroom. I then realized that while sex trafficking would be really hard to talk about in a classroom, really hard to make school appropriate, that was the kind of trafficking that was most relevant to my students. And so I would be doing them a disservice by not covering that. So I chose to cover sex trafficking. So I ended up landing on doing sex trafficking and labor trafficking. I also needed to decide how long the unit would be. I landed on 5 days. I needed to decide what contents I would cover. Initially, I was going to try and do math and language arts to have them taught at the same time. I eventually decided to just do language arts for now. Expanding into doing math may be something I do eventually, but for the time being, my project just covers language arts standards. I also had to decide what each day was going to look like. So, day 1 is an overview, day 2 is about sex trafficking, day 3 is about labor trafficking, day 4 is a service project day, and day 5 is just a reflective day. And it's really, really open-ended, intentionally. This unit is planned in a way that any teacher could pick it up and make it work for their classroom. So I didn't put a ton of specific things in it, just because I wanted it to be something that could be adapted to lots of different kinds of classrooms. So, got into this a little bit, but what does this unit include? It includes a teacher letter. It includes 5 days of instruction and activities. It includes a letter to parents and a letter to administrators. So, the teacher letter. It's pretty basic. It just lays out what each of the days are, like I just did, and once again gives the teacher permission to, hey, you can adapt this however you want. If this works better in your classroom to do it this way, then do it that way. So that's what the teacher letter. The first day of the unit is just a basic overview. This day was pretty easy for me to write. I started with PowerPoint I used before, adapted it a little bit. I made some guided notes to go along with the PowerPoint, so students could take notes along with the PowerPoint and keep up with, it helps keep them engaged. Then I gave them a KWL chart for the end of the day. KWL stands for know what you already knew, what you want to know more about, and what you learned. So for the K, they put down what they already knew about human trafficking. For L or W, they put down what they want to know more about, and L is what they learned. So that helps the teacher drive instruction, but it also helps the students reflect on what they learned. And the objective for that day is that they had write 3 specific things about human trafficking on their graphic organizer, the KWL chart. Day 2 was the most complicated day of the entire unit. It's my favorite day because I really like what ended up happening, but it was incredibly complicated to plan. So, I decided pretty early on, okay, we're going to start with sex trafficking first. We're going to cover sex trafficking. I really wanted that to be connected to stories because those are the stories that are most prevalent. Those are the stories that are easiest to find. So I went on a search for stories. So I read lots of books about human trafficking, some of them fiction, some of them nonfiction, some of them memoirs. A lot of them were really bad. A lot of them were not written well, or some of the fiction ones just had like a lot of inaccuracies in them. So there's a lot of stuff that I read that I couldn't use. I ended up landing on 2 books. The Slave Across the Street by Teresa Flores and Tricks by Ellen Hopkins. So The Slave Across the Street is where one of my stories came from. It's Teresa's own story about being trafficked. And then the other book has 5 stories, and I picked 2. I picked a story about a girl named Whitney who had an abusive boyfriend who lured her into human trafficking, and a boy named Cody who is enticed into human trafficking through needing money. I chose these stories because they have a variety of backgrounds. Teresa was upper middle class. That's not something that you typically hear of. Whitney was probably the story that most of us have heard of. It's an abusive boyfriend, lures her into trafficking, tricks her using drugs. Cody is a boy who is lured into human trafficking. So I really want to show the diverse backgrounds that can still end up in human trafficking. So my initial plan with these stories was to just use them straight from the books. I was going to write letters to ask that whoever taught the unit could send to the teacher or the authors of the books to ask them for permission to use the books. That didn't end up happening. I couldn't find sections of the book that said enough things that I wanted to say, but was still something I could use in the classroom. So what I did instead was I wrote summaries of each of the stories. So we have 3 summaries. So the way this looks in the classroom for that day is the teacher leads a jigsaw. What that looks like is you have groups of 3 students. Each student in each group has a different summary. They read each summary and answer questions about their own summary. Then, once they're done with that should probably take a little bit more than half of the class time. They are given a set of questions to answer as a group. That is when they discuss their different stories and compare and contrast the different stories. So, this allows all of the students to hear different stories, but not all of the students have to read all the different stories. So it lets them discuss. It's something that's really, really easy to scaffold or give students at a different level by making the different summaries different difficulty levels. That is not something that I did when I wrote it, but it's something that would not be too hard to do. So that's day 2. Day 3 was a pretty simple day. It focuses on labor trafficking. So I had found a video not too long before about a labor trafficking case that happened in Ohio where there were miners working at an egg farm without being paid. So I used that news story, and then I wrote a discussion guide and an assignment for students to do that follows up on that labor trafficking. Day 4 is another day that I'm very excited about. This is where Out of Darkness comes in. So Out of Darkness is an organization in Columbus that I've worked with since my freshman year of college. And one of the biggest things they do is a street ministry called Princess Nights. So what that looks like is a whole bunch of people pile into a van, and we drive around Columbus in this certain section. It's perfectly safe. They've been doing it for years. And we get out of the car and we talk to different ladies who are being trafficked, or maybe not being trafficked, just ladies on the side of the street. We give them a card and a rose and ask them if we can pray for them. So that's relevant to the unit because I asked them if that would be something that hypothetically middle school students could do. And they said, oh yeah, we'd love to get cards from middle schoolers because middle schoolers are great. So day 4 is just really an action day. It's, here, you've learned all these things, these really terrible things that are happening in the world, but hey, here's something tangible you can do about it. So I got the letter writing guidelines from Out of Darkness. Those are in the unit, and just a list of supplies you might need, and a little bit more background for the teacher if they need more background if they're not familiar with Out of Darkness, and the address to send the cards to when they are done. Day 5 of the unit is probably the most open-ended, and it was harder to create than I thought it was going to be just because I made it so open-ended. So this is the reflective and the sum-up day. The only real requirement I gave for that day is that students come up with 5 of something. It could be 5 signs of human trafficking. It could be 5 ways to stay out of human trafficking. And those are things that would rise out of the discussions in class and the resources that were given. So, but I really made this open-ended because this is the day that's going to look different depending on what kind of classroom you're in. It would look different depending on where the classroom is doing this. If it's a rural classroom, if it's a city classroom. It would look different just based on the different personalities you have in your class. So I really want to make this day open-ended. This day also includes a certificate I made using Canva that gives recognition to the students that, hey, you finished this, you did this hard thing, and that's really cool. The last things in the unit plan itself are the parent and administrator letters. These are pretty similar to each other. They both talk about the unit and why it's important and have some research backing why it's important. And they just cite, why it's important. And the administrator letter is a letter that could be used to start a conversation with the administrator saying, hey, this is something I want to do. Let's talk about it. The parent letters are for when the teachers got permission to do that, they're going to do the unit. Now they need to talk to parents about it and see like, hey, this is what we're going to do. This is why we're doing it. If you have questions, please talk to me. These are things that could be changed. The teacher doesn't have to use them, but it's just a resource for whatever teacher ends up using it. So next steps with this project, obviously I would love to teach this unit. I'm not sure at this point where I'm going to end up as far as teaching jobs, but I hope to at some point be at a place that I could teach this. I would also love to include it and make it more multidisciplinary, so include history or math or science in some way, and have it be a more multidisciplinary unit, and I think that would be really cool. But yeah, I think that's about all I got.